Welcome to the 775 Alive podcast, your rural Nevada headquarters for decoding politics, economics, and general global shenanigans. I'm Crystal Newton, your business strategist, breaking down why Nevada's hustle is stronger than a sagebrush root in a windstorm. Here with my trusty co-host, Scott Gaborski, PhD historian, here to explain the smart lessons of history, even if we are likely to ignore them. Grab your boots for a wild ride through today's most important news.
Okay, welcome back here to 775 Alive. We're joined today from Tyler, Texas by attorney Ken Good. Welcome, Ken.
Well, thank you very much for having me. And hello from Texas.
Yeah. Texas is Nevada's cultural cousin. We're very close.
Oh, well, good.
Yeah.
That speaks very good of y'all's state and your neighborhood, because when I think of someone saying that, that's very heartwarming, because, I was born and bred in Texas and have lived all over Texas.
Well, and I've spent a lot of time in liberal states, and I'm very comfortable when I'm in Texas.
Well, and, Texas, even when it was a Democrat state, was a conservative Democrat state. The only reason why it's Republican now is the Democrats don't have room for conservatives in their party anymore.
All right.
Yeah.
And the reason we asked Ken to join us today, or he actually reached out to us, was to talk about an issue that's been roiling sort of national debates here for the last 5 or 6 years, and that's the issue of cashless bail, and what this is doing to our judicial system and our ability here to manage crime. So, Ken, just to start out, I'd like you first give us a little bit of more of your background. I'm sure there's more to you than just being from Texas, and then we could get into the issue.
Sure. I'm an attorney. I'm actually married to another attorney, and we met on a blind date in 1990 something. So I would say probably the most important thing to know about me is I am a father of 2 girls. I always like to say that. And I think being a father of girls is very different than being a father of boys. And I think the good Lord knew that I needed girls because he knows how competitive I am. And if I was a father of boys, I would have been standing on the side of the football field, yelling at the referees and yelling at probably my son. And so I was the dad who was at the back of the dance recital on my phone, but also running a video camera over and over and over. So I think that's probably the most important thing to know about me. I've been an attorney for over 30 years, probably over 35. I started out doing medical malpractice defense. I was on a trial team that was very successful. I learned to practice law there. I started doing appellate work, and then as a result of that, started representing bondsmen, and then becoming knowledgeable. I don't know about expert, but knowledgeable on bail issues. And I've written articles across the country on bail related matters. I've argued cases on bail issues at the Court of Criminal Appeals in Texas. And I've argued other cases at the Supreme Court of Texas. So, I have I call it a legal mind. So when I look at issues, I like to look at it from the legal standpoint. And then historically, and so a lot of what we're seeing now, we're kind of repeating the same cycle that we went through in the 60s, and it's kind of fun to watch that and see why it's worse this time than it was in the 60s. And other than that, I'm just getting old, 65. My wife is going to retire in a year, and I'm just hyper as all get out, as you can already tell. And as long as I'm in good health, I plan to continue working for a while.
Oh, good.
Yeah, I hope you retire with cashless bail on the table.
I know.
Win this one. So I know most of our audience probably knows what cashless bail is, but just to put it out there, you're releasing criminals before trial without any money on the promise that they'll come back and face justice, which is it's an honor system, probably in the worst possible time in our culture.
Oh, I think that's probably a good way to summarize it. I would also add to that is cashless bail is just, Trump's term for simple release. Simple release is where we release somebody from jail just on their promise to come back. And in different parts of the country, we call it different things. Texas calls it release on a personal bond. It's just a bond without sureties. New York would call it release with no bond. And then California would call it release on zero bail. They're all just the same thing, simple release. And simple release is just what you said, nothing more than your promise. And the whole concept of releasing somebody before trial is, what assurance are you going to give the court that you're going to come back? And under cashless bail or simple release, you're giving no assurance. It's just your bare promise. And the failure to appear is so high on those it ends up being you can't hold anybody accountable because you'd have everybody in jail. And that's what causes the chaos from simple release.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about it because this idea of simple release, cashless bail, however one wants to do it, has really been something that emerged. Well, I mean, it's been discussed, but it's really become part of the popular discussion since about 2020. It was all tied to, if I remember right, a lot of the reforms going on around George Floyd or proposed after the George Floyd situation and some other stuff. What is the argument for going to a simple release?
Oh, I don't like to argue for the other sides when they're really making bad arguments. But the argument for, what it started out with is the argument that we're going to have to change the way we do bail because the way we're currently doing it is unconstitutional. So that was the first argument that was made. But the problem is the courts eventually held bail constitutional. So then their argument became fairness. Well, we need to treat everybody the same when that's not what it's not the way the system was built. The system was built that we treat everybody differently. We want to treat you one way and we want to treat someone that has a long criminal history differently. We want to put the amount of pressure needed to make them productive citizens. And so, me being ornery and stubborn, I'm going to need more pressure than probably either one of you. Probably not true. I'm just weakling as all get out. So I would turn really quick, just scold me. But so, I mean, the problem is we have activists that came in and said, let's try these other things. And, they said, oh, here's all the science that says they'll work just as good. And they were not. There was nothing that proved that. They just turned out to be experiments that blew up. And the problem is the activists have never admitted that their proposals wouldn't work. They just say we need more time. And so that's really what's happened. We've been trying experiments since 2020, and we've seen a lot of states start rolling back their experiments because they just didn't work.
And the unconstitutional argument comes under an Eighth Amendment issue. Am I understanding that right?
No, the Eighth Amendment was resolved many, many years ago, even before 2020. So they were arguing equal protection and due process.
Okay.
So they were arguing that we need to treat everybody the same. Okay, so fairness, and that there's due process violations. You could say substantive or procedural. The ones that they've identified that where they've made progress is procedural due process. But like in the case of O'Donnell versus Harris County, the court that's what the court found, and ultimately the Court of Appeals said, well, when you find a procedural defect, then the remedy's procedural. Well, she was given a substantive remedy. So the procedural defect is they weren't having a hearing. So the remedy would be you have a hearing, but she was imposing a remedy of you just release them. If you had a procedural defect, then you had to release them. And the Court of Appeals reversed her on that. And but that's one example. And then ultimately the courts on the substantive issues have ruled against the plaintiffs. And, these activist groups are really difficult to catch and get them to acknowledge. I mean, there was an article in the Dallas Morning News where they were saying every trial court in the country that has reviewed our arguments have held the private surety bail system unconstitutional. Well, what they left out was every court of appeals that had reviewed their arguments had reversed. And that wasn't in the article. So I had to send in a letter to the editor and even cite cases. And then they did publish that. But I mean, that's the type of people we're dealing with.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I really appreciate you not wanting to make the argument for the other side. And I was thinking a lot about how to lay out this issue, and it became very clear to me, and I could be completely wrong here, but it seems to me that this equity argument, it's been successful, which I think all three of us could sit here and go, how could you argue for letting criminals out? That's dumb. But I'm like, there must have been something that convinced people. And I'm like, yeah, they have a good argument, but I think what actually made this take off is our side's inability to say what seems to be true is that the reason there's more minority groups in prison is because they commit more of the crimes. And that's such a hard thing to say. It's not like we're judging them. It's not like we're telling them they're bad people. It's just, you guys are committing more of the crimes. And it seems like the solution's being pushed forward of like, let's just ignore it in the spirit of equity. Is that completely off, or is that right?
No, that's exactly right. And this is a very complex issue. And I think you're right about the activists made progress on that. They got a lot of, they went down the road really far because they kind of made it toxic to even talk about this issue. But there's a lot of data on it. Minnesota has, in recent years started keeping data all the way down to the race of the person who called and filed charges. And their data showed that, that certain minority groups commit more crimes on a 10-to-1 ratio. And, we know crime is by and large committed within the same racial group. So, it's the same race reporting the crimes and then the same race getting arrested, 10-to-1 more crimes. But once they get into the criminal justice system in Minnesota, that race gets treated better than other races. And so they commit more crime, but once they get into the criminal justice system, they get treated better. And there's a big reason for this. There's multiple reasons about why this is true. And one of them is we've discounted crime for certain minority groups historically. As long as you committed crime within your racial group, the certain groups weren't prosecuted. And so they learned, well, as long as we're committing crime within our racial group, we're going to be okay. And so, and then we got to the point where we were not doing that anymore. And so we treated all races the same. And so since certain racial groups had more crime, well, then obviously those groups had more people show up in the, criminal justice system. That's still true to this day. And there's still parts of this country where you will get called an absolute racist for even making that argument.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it's showing up. This is sort of off topic, but I just want to throw it out because this is actually one of the arguments driving with Native American communities, the missing and murdered Indigenous women and persons movement, is that in a lot of cases, crime and missing persons particularly were ignored among that group, in part because of jurisdictional boundaries. But now when you start looking at this again, it's astounding how much of a problem this is. So there is, at least in my view, there is some sense in this progression, but doesn't part of this also go back to conceptualizations that we're having about where crime ultimately comes from? You have one group that has argued for years crime is inherently either socioeconomically driven, right? And this leads into a cashless bail. People are poor, therefore they rob to support themselves. But
that argument says we can stop crime by giving everybody a house. I mean,
right.
I've debated activists, and that's their argument. We just need to give everybody a house, and we won't have crime. I'm like, we already have programs that'll provide them with rent. We already have programs that will provide them with food, and it's not doing the job. So, what are you going to say? Are we going to give them a second home? A summer home? So that's going to stop crime? I mean, no. I mean, we have poor people in this country that are very religious families. They don't commit crime, so that's not the problem.
Right. But then you have the other side that any criminal activity whatsoever is a fundamentally moral failing on the part of the individual, and it's the lock up and throw the key mentality, which has its own problems as well. Wouldn't you agree?
I do agree when we want to lock up and throw away the key for first-time offenders, but I don't think we do that. Where we're at in our country is we have so much crime is we have states, I would say blue states, that don't want to lock up and throw away the key on a third offense, a third-time offender, fourth-time offender, or a fifth-time, or how about a 10th-time offender? How about any time offender? I mean, Texas and California was even a 3-strikes you're out state at one point in time, and I think it's probably still in the books for, felonies, and there's a reason why that is. I mean, forget about race for a moment. We have a small group of people that commit most of the crime, and so if you want to stop 60% of the crime, you need to control that small group of people. And it's kind of like a city within the city, a crime city. And what we don't realize is there's also a gray area living between the two cities, and they're watching every day to see how the crime people are. If they're getting away with it, then they're going to err on the side of crime that day. But if they're not, then they're going to err on law and order. And so we can influence that smaller, the gray area, but we can stop 50-60% of the crime by addressing a small group of people. I mean, there was a report out in the last 2 weeks saying that there were 60-something people in an urban area that was the cause of over 5,000 arrests in the subways. 60-something people. I mean, sounds like we could be a lot safer to addressing 60-something people.
Right. Well, and that's something that seems to show up because we did an interview last year, Crystal, if you remember, with former City of Elko Police Chief Ty Trouton. And he
Yeah.
talked about this same issue from a rural perspective. So it's not just the cities that have subways and whatnot. He's seeing the same pattern in rural communities where there's a very small group of people who are committing the vast majority of the crimes.
Mhm.
And sort of painting them through these cashless bail or other type of the redirective justice sort of approaches seems to be causing problems because we can't differentiate between the first time offender and the sixth time offender in law.
Mhm. I think that's true. A lot of the soft on crime policies, the first thing they do is they say, here's a list of crimes that the judges no longer have discretion. They have to release them under whatever their simple release mechanism is. That's what New York did. And so every couple of years as they've rolled it back, they've taken crimes off of the list to give the judges more discretion. But just think about it. You've got a 10-year criminal history and I'm a first time offender. And we get arrested for a crime that's on this list. Their statutes require we be treated the same. Mm-hmm. Well, for me, somebody with a 10-year criminal history, that's just the cost of doing business. Mm. And then when you add on to that, it's a drug offense. And then the soft on crime people no longer file make the crimes heavier based on how much drugs you're doing. They're just going to treat it as possession. Well, 2 weeks in the pokey is just the cost of doing business for the drug dealers. They'll be happy to do that. They'll get a little vacation. I mean, they're not going to be happy for going to jail for 2 weeks, but to them, it's just a cost of doing business instead of, well, let's enhance that charge with the 20 pounds of methamphetamines that you're holding. And now suddenly it's a 10-year offense. Well, we've lost all incentive for them to not do crime.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. We just recently did an episode, with Dave Marlin. He runs an addiction center here in Las Vegas, and from his perspective, he really intersected with this cashless bail thing because he sees a lot of addicts that could really benefit from being in jail for a couple days or a couple weeks, and a lot of addicts that I've met with recovering addicts. My sister was a drug addict, and we spent years working with her and get a chance to talk to these people. And I was always surprised to hear that the ones that did get locked up, a lot of times they're grateful that they got locked up because it gave them a chance to really sit and think about their life and what they're doing. And it's just another example of where this cashless bail thing is doing more harm than good.
I think that's a really good point. I mean, look at Oregon where they delegalized or decriminalized almost all their hard drugs for a period of time, but they set up all these counseling and treatment programs. Well, less than 0.001%, 0.001% of the people went into those programs because they lost the hammer. I mean, the beauty of the criminal justice system is the hammer that you're going to go to the prison unless you go to drug rehab. And drug rehab has a high failure rate. I mean, fails 75% of the time. So you're going to need that hammer over and over until it works, or they give up and they go to jail. I mean, I'm very touched by, what you said about your sister. I had the same situation. I graduated from law school in May of 1989. I took the bar exam in July. While I'm waiting for my results, my sister had a car accident in October of 1989, broke every bone in her face, and then started a 30-year drug addiction through prescription drugs. And I tried everything in the world. I tried to get her put in jail, because it was the poor man's drug rehab. We've taken all that away. I mean, we're taking away families' opportunities to try to turn their loved ones around. And I mean, she had a miserable life because she had a brain injury, but she was functional. She was very smart to begin with. So she was still above average, even with a brain injury. But in the end of her life, I mean, I ended up having to step in, having her declared incompetent. I was her guardian. She lived in an assisted living facility where they monitored her drugs so she couldn't take advantage of them. And they ended up being probably some of the happiest years of her life. She was on the welcome committee. I mean, she was walking people's dogs if they weren't able to do it. And she was, she called it hurting her little old ladies. And I mean, it's just, it's sad when you think about it, but people, cause you dealt with that with your sister. I mean, it's just, it's a thing that can just tear apart a family. And we see that across the country, and it's part of what's tearing apart our society.
Mm-hmm. And there's two things I want to point out really quickly, and I'll hand it off to you, Scott. Just to put a fine point on that, the few times she did go to jail was some of the few times our family got good sleep because it was the only time we knew she wasn't dead in a gutter. And then also to follow up on the Oregon decriminalization thing, I do want to point out and make it a very important point. They wound up repealing that because people started to die at higher rates.
Well, they were setting new
horrific.
overdose rates, records every month.
Horrific consequences to these policies.
Right. Well, and I was going to segue, and that's fine, because I think this is, we forced you to argue the case for cashless bail. Your activism on your end is actually for a cash bail system. So what are some of the advantages outside of potentially, as we just discussed, getting some people who might actually need immediate help? In your view, what are some of the advantages of the cash system like we've traditionally had?
I think probably the primary benefit of the cash bail system is getting families involved. I mean, by and large, most bondsmen, their first call is from family, not from the jail. And so think about it. You've been arrested 6 times over the last 5 years, and we're coming to bail you out, and your loved one, your sister, is still standing up for you and says, I think you can turn it around. I still have faith in you. And I think the power of that is just incredible. And, I had one of these activist groups saying, we can do the same thing. And I'm like, you haven't been able to yet. Mm-hmm. I mean, the bail industry, I don't think we realize this, but it's a personal relationship business. You have personal relationships with the defendant, but you also have them with the jail. You have them with the DA's office. You have them with the judges. And so bondsmen, they work 20 years to get really good reputations. And then, we're just in one of that industry that it just takes one mistake and then suddenly you're just sorry, piss poor bondsman, and I'm the sorry, piss poor bondsman's attorney. And you just go back to all the known stereotypes. And so I emphasize when I talk to bondsmen, you work really, really hard to get a really good reputation. It doesn't take anything to get destroyed. But I think that's probably the biggest benefit of the private industry. But I think after that, you've got to put accountability on there. I mean, you just compare failure to appear rates. The bail industry is less than 10%. Cash bonds, the full amount just posted in cash, has at least 2 times the failure to appear rate of that. And when you get to the simple release, it's, we have studies that show 50% failure to appear rate, 70% failure to appear rate, 80% failure to appear rate. And let's just compare, when you have 1,000 people showing up a week for court, the difference. Less than 100 people show up, or then you have 300 not show up, or then you have 500 not show up, or you have as many as 800 people not show up. I mean, suddenly the cases can't go forward without the defendant because they have constitutional rights to be there. So they miss court, the court can't go forward. And so it's just devastating. That's why using this simple release pushes the courts to dismiss cases to prevent backlogs. And when you dismiss cases, criminals see that as a green light to commit more crime because they got away with it.
Right. Well, doesn't it also create a problem because somebody misses a court case, right? Say they're the first time offender on cashless bail. They missed a court case. Now there's a bench warrant for them. So now you're compounding the record. And as this goes on, even in a fairly short period of time, all of a sudden, instead of one offense, then maybe, I don't know, $500 cash bail might have, might have guaranteed this person shows up, now they're a habitual criminal because of the combination of these bench warrants and everything else.
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, the bench warrant for a failure to appear is one thing, but what really causes problem is if they file new charges for bail jumping. And, even if it's a misdemeanor case in Texas, if you get charged with bail jumping, that's a felony. A lot of counties don't do that. Because can you imagine? I mean, how many cases are you adding to the system if you got a 50% failure to appear rate, and your system can't handle that? So I don't think that gets used very often. Also, I think for a bail jumping charge, you got to have a willful failure to appear. And we're seeing the activists start making distinctions between we should only punish defendants for a willful failure to appear, not for a stupid failure to appear. And I'm like, both commit the same damage to the criminal justice system. And it may start out as stupid, but when the warrant's issued, they get scared and run. And so now it's not really stupid anymore. Well, maybe it's stupider. I mean, all that is an attempt to further tie the hands of judges so they don't have the discretion to address people when they fail to show up for court. I mean, if you want to talk about their arguments, their biggest argument for why we should have cashless bail is the presumption of innocence. What they don't tell you is that's been ruled against them on that argument. That was decided in the courts decades ago, that the presumption of innocence doesn't apply at setting bail. But they don't care about what the law is. They care about what the talking points are.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, and can we get a bit into this procedural aspect of this? Because I think it's interesting, and I brought it up because Nevada is, of course, a cash bail state, but a series of reforms that were put into place stemming from a big court case back in 2020 down in Clark County, Valdez Jimenez versus the 8th District Court, turned exactly on these procedural issues. So in my mind, at least, again, not a lawyer, don't play one on TV. This turns on these issues is that what it basically says is in Nevada, judges can no longer set bail based solely on a paper assessment of the crime and everything. There has to be an actual hearing, right? And as part of that hearing, judges are also required to take in a whole range of circumstances. Does the person arrested have a job? Do they have family? What's their economic circumstances? And use that as the basis to set bail. Do you feel that's a potentially a good way to bridge these two gaps, or does it have its own problems?
I think it creates its own set of problems. And, I think probably a good example of that is, people ask me all the time, what's the compromise between the activists and us? And I find it difficult to find a compromise when the activists won't even admit what they're proposing is not working or what they're doing is not working. So how can you find a compromise when one side of the debate is lying all the time? And so anything that you're doing that's tying the hands of judges. And so if you're saying procedurally, you can't do this without having a hearing, so that slows down people getting released from jail, or you have to give them an option that is not the private surety industry as an option to get out of jail, so the jail doesn't get full quicker. And so that creates problems because we've already pointed out all the other release mechanisms puts people in a worse position. They have, there's a study from Yolo County, California, that compared release of multiple people, but release of similar situated people, one on a nonviolent offense, all of them nonviolent, but one on a simple release, one on a private surety bond. And that study found that somebody released on simple release had a 200% greater chance of being arrested for a new violent offense in the next 18 months. And so if you look at that and you say, well, we think this is right. I mean, I would never want any of my family members to ever be released on simple release. And you've got to hold that as an option only for very extreme cases because they're first time offenders. You don't want to risk putting them in a worse position. But the activists don't see it like that. They see, we just got to treat everybody the same. And they don't see that as a failure. The failure is just the jail population. If we release more people from jail, crime goes up, it's still a success to them.
Yeah, so different measures. Yeah, go ahead, Crystal.
Yeah, so I'm curious, Ken, if you had by some, and actually this is not that far-fetched because you're incredibly well-spoken. You've talked to people in every single state about this issue. I'm kind of curious if you could spend some time with Donald Trump and give him advice. What would you give him? What would you say to him?
Well, okay, so I'm going to give a disclaimer, first of all. People with Trump derangement syndrome should not listen for a few moments. Because I look at Trump and I just have nothing but admiration. I mean, if you look at a man and said, here is somebody that they tried to crush, they tried to put him in jail. And, here's a guy who has said, these are what things that we need to do to help our inner cities. And these are not areas that we're going to historically vote Republican. They're not going to be his supporters. I would say you could make a very strong argument. He did that because he thought that was in the best interest of those communities. And I think this getting rid of cash bail is another example of one of those issues where Trump has looked at it. And he specifically referenced the Yolo County study. And, so he believes that. And when you believe that, you just have to come to the conclusion, why would you use any of those things? And so if I was to give President Trump advice, I would say, keep up the good work. I really would. I mean, I think he's doing what he thinks is best for our country, especially when it deals with our urban areas. And I think he's being castigated for it. And I think if you were a political person, you could look at it and say, of course they're going to castigate him, because if they don't, this could be the death of their party for a long, long time. If the public starts thinking that you've enacted these soft on crime policies, knowing that they were going to injure and kill and cause death, then you're going to lose support. And so they cannot admit that. And so I think a lot of the reaction to Trump is because they know that this would have severe damage to their party if they were to even admit a little bit that what he's doing is right.
So it sounds to me, and just real quick, sorry, Scott. I just want to hear from you if you think this. It sounds like the legal system is intact. This is a cultural issue. Is this?
Yeah, I would say politics, and I would say let's trace this back probably 4, 5, 6, 7 election cycles. So a cycle is every 2 years, but you could go back and you could see 6 months before a national election, there was something that happened in the news, and there would be protests, and it probably built to a crescendo with George Floyd. But before George Floyd, then, you would just hear you're being mistreated and you are not being treated fairly, and you need to get mad and you need to come out and vote in larger numbers. But then after the election, it would go back to status quo, business as usual. And what happened is the mob created by the activists started seeing this. And so they started electing the true believers, some people would say the crazies, that were going to enact these policies no matter what the result, because that's what the mob wanted. When you create a mob, you usually lose control over the mob. And that's really kind of what I think has happened over the years. And when you see Trump, his last election is the first, Trump 2.0 is the first time we didn't have a mob for a long time before the national election. It was because they had got to the point where it would have been detrimental to their campaign if it had happened. And so it's not like they didn't have the opportunity. It's just the polls said that it would have hurt them to do that. And I hope we stay in that cycle for a while, because we're now at the point where the backlash has started. Trump 2.0, the crime, the immigration issues, we're having the same backlash we had in the 60s that brought us Reagan and the war on drugs. We're doing it all over again. And this time we'll see. We need one more national election where voters vote law and order, and then both parties will reset to the way they've been historically, which is law and order parties. But we need one more national election. If we don't get it this time, then it'll be delayed a couple more years, but we'll eventually get it, because what we're doing now is not sustainable, and the states are seeing it, and they're rolling back their criminal justice laws. New York's done it 3 times, and crime is still the number one issue in the governor's race.
And Democrats still deny. They'll pretend it never happened. They'll just go back, law and order.
They'll do like Virginia. She's a law and order candidate, and she would never redistrict, and then she gets elected, and it's like gung-ho redistricting, and we're going to be soft on crime.
All right. Well, but this and the backlash of some of these things, I mean, one of the things that sort of sparked us being introduced to you and starting this conversation is a series of episodes recently where I think it was in Chicago, where you had somebody that was released on simple release, but with a GPS monitor, correct?
Yes, sir.
And then what happened in that situation? Because I think it's illustrative of some of the issues we're running up against.
Well, I think it's a good example of what we're seeing across the country. We've known it within the bail industry. So, if you cut off your GPS monitor, what happens? I think the public would think that if you cut off your GPS monitor, somebody's always watching it, and that you would end up getting arrested within a short period of time. But that's not what happens. What happens is it gets reported, and then somebody has to file a motion with the judge, and then the judge has to issue a warrant, and then you usually have to commit another crime. I mean, we've had an example in the last month from Harris County in Houston, Texas, where somebody cut off his GPS monitor at 5:30 in the afternoon on Friday. So the court didn't find out about it till Monday morning. By then, he had driven, or he'd gone to Canada, got a fake Belgian passport, and flew to Italy. And when he got off the plane, they discovered that his passport, his Belgian passport, was fake, and they arrested him. He's still there. But in the example that you're talking about, the guy cut off his monitor, got into a situation, and ends up killing a couple of officers. I mean, GPS monitors you think are going to make us more safe, but if you're just a cut away from creating more public safety issues, then it's an illusion of public safety.
Do you think hypothetically that and I know activists wouldn't do it, and I'm not sure how you could do it legally, but this gets us back to the procedural trap, right? Is that there has to be like 6 stages before the courts can take action, and the longer you delay the action courts can take, you get into some problems. But in the GPS situation, because that's been one talked about, is we could do simple release because they'll have the ankle monitor and we'll know where they are at all times, and that's proven not viable. But is there some possibility of introducing something into legal codes that say, okay, if you are given a GPS monitor, even in a pre-trial situation, right, that if that monitor stops, obviously if it stops for a mechanical failure, you shouldn't hold the person responsible. But if you cut it off, that automatically triggers a BOLO or release, or is that just something that's not workable?
But it's not workable from the standpoint of the GPS monitoring company can't issue a warrant. So they've got to report it to somebody. So, I mean, when you cut it, it automatically reports to the GPS monitoring company, but they can't issue the warrant. And so they're going to have to send it to somebody, and then somebody may have to file a motion with the court. Depends on who's in charge of bail. So if the judge is in charge of bail, that's going to be sent to probably a pretrial release department or or the district attorney. They'll file a motion, and then the judge could set it for a hearing, or he could just, based on reviewing it, he could issue a warrant. In Texas, he could say, okay, based on this, I'm issuing a warrant. But there's some places where they'd say, okay, you've alleged that the guy's cut off his GPS, so let's have a hearing on this. Well, that's further delaying everything. And so, I think the GPS thing is an illusion of public safety. Compare that to the private industry. So the private industry, I don't think people realize we make people report to us weekly, and we have family involvement. So what happens, if you start doing drugs again, but you're on your GPS monitor, I mean, the family doesn't call the GPS monitoring company and says, little Johnny has started doing drugs again. But we have family members call us all the time saying, little Johnny has started doing drugs again, and we want you to know that. We can report that to the court, and the court can withdraw their bond or take them off bond, put them back in jail as a result of those allegations. And so what does that do? I mean, it gets them back on the straight and narrow faster because there's accountability. All these simple release mechanisms, all these experiments that are not working, it's all different ways of removing accountability from the criminal justice system.
So you have experience with, you said when the family gets involved, it's usually a better outcome. Can you give us an idea or illustrate just the stark difference between somebody out on bail that the family didn't get involved with versus somebody going out on bail and having family get involved? Is there a massive difference in success and outcomes?
Well, I think the failure to appear rates is probably the biggest example. But yes, I would say the difference is as stark as career criminals. Because, a career criminal is the person who has been arrested so many times, they've run through their friends, and then they've run through all their family. Right. And so they've been arrested so many times that nobody will call the bonding company for them. And you think, okay, well, what does that got to do with this? Well, we've had this rise after George Floyd of all these charitable bail funds. Well, the charitable bail funds found out pretty quickly, because they were always saying, oh, well, we've got first-time offenders stuck in jail. No, we don't. That was a myth. So they started bonding out, and they couldn't find any people to bond out because the families were still calling us. So the people that were left in jail were the career criminals. And so they started bonding out them and got their butts and some big cracks. And so some bonding companies, some charitable bail funds withdrew from states because they started getting sued because they were bonding out career criminals.
And these are the types of like charitable bail funds, for instance, that Kamala Harris helped manage when she was AG there in California.
When she was vice president, she did a post on social media asking people to contribute to them, and they raised a bunch of money. And, since then they've never raised that much money, and they've, constantly gone down in value, but also they started giving themselves big salaries. We've had examples of people getting arrested for, mismanagement of those funds or stealing those funds. And so they were always going to be short-lived, but they did a lot of damage in some states while they were around.
It's just mind-boggling to me that like California can go. At one point they had 3 strikes, you're out, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do you go from 3 strikes, you're out to let's raise bond money for all the criminals? I
think it's kind of interesting because I think the state is a contradiction. The criminal justice system was still conservative, even when the state was tracking to the left pretty hard. And so I think that's one of the reasons why you see this contradiction. California legislature, they passed some really extreme left policies, but then they did referendums on them and the public voted them down. But then they would, LA County would still try to do them even though the voters voted them down. So it's kind of, the criminal justice system is, I wouldn't say still conservative, but for a long time was still conservative when the state was liberal.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a pretty cynical person. Hello, nice to meet you. There's a lot of layers to this layer cake, but it being in politics, it wouldn't surprise me that the Democrats are particularly railing on this because none of their donors come from the prison industry. That might have something to do with it.
That's been a good question. Why are the activists harping on this, and why are they pushing this issue? And that's hard. And I would just say this: it's a coalition on the left, and there are members of that coalition that are true believers. They're just do-gooders, but there are some members of the coalition that are there to create chaos. And I think the extreme activists are there to create chaos. They don't want there to be prisons. And, if you don't have prisons, you're not going to have a society, because the reason, there's some philosophers that said the reason why we came together to form societies was for public safety. So we compromised the power I have and the power you have. And I didn't try to fight you for your power all the time when we came together as communities so that we could have public safety. Well, if you take that away, well, then it's just the public will demand public safety. They will demand to be safe. And so we all remember in the old country and the old Westerns where the posse would go out. And sometimes the posse would take charge. They'd be a mob. We've had examples of that during this time. I remember the guy in New York who was on a subway and he stepped in to help somebody and they prosecuted him. Well, the reason why they prosecuted him is because they were trying to send a message to the other do-gooders, don't do it.
Yeah, and I only say this, I wanted to point that out because I noticed under the Biden administration, I've had a 20-year career now as a business person, and under the Biden administration, I noticed that their policies tended to attack conservative industries specifically. Mm-hmm. And so I started to catch on to that. It's almost like a mafia-esque way that the Democrats go after people that don't support them. So I wanted to point that out because I was like, maybe that's what's happening with the prison industry complex is they're not donating to Democrats. So they're just throwing the wall at them or throwing.
But, Biden's a really good example of, he ran as a moderate. He got elected because he was a moderate. But then once he was elected, he ruled the country he pretty much, there was no activist policy that he didn't like. Mm-hmm. And so I would say, honestly, I would say they had something on him because he was a moderate. He was a moderate for many, many years, but he got elected and then he ran the country as an extreme activist.
Yeah, I'd never seen anything like it. I was like,
well, yeah, my argument was that they didn't have anything on Biden. I think Biden didn't have control of administration. It had about 3 different factions operating, and it was whoever got first to the auto pen Or
Well, that's a
maybe
good
we get to see
argument
him.
saying that he wasn't there mentally. And
Yeah.
so he had three different factions because, if he's there mentally, he sets the tone. If you're not on board with my policies, then you're gone. And that's what he should have done. But I don't really know. You could see the push from the activists on Obama, because he ran as a moderate and was a moderate. But by the end of his second term, he had done the shift, and was more, activist. And then when Biden came in, it was just all activists. And so, there could be books written on that, but the problem is the books that we'll be reading about Biden will be on all the corruption and, the other, his medical conditions behind the scenes, especially now his wife's coming out in the last week saying,
Oh, yeah.
she thought he was having a heart attack at the big debate. And I'm like, you did not think you were having, okay. So really what you're telling us is you lied when you were saying, he just had a cold. And
Right.
so now you're saying you thought I didn't believe you then, and I don't believe you now, because the other thing she was saying is, I'd never seen it before and I've never seen it since. I disagree with that. I'd seen problems to that level before, and I've seen problems since. And so for her to say, oh no, I've never seen that before and I've never seen it since, liar, in my opinion. And I think she was lying when she said it was a cough. It was a cold, and she's lying now. And so the truth about all that, which it will come out eventually, because everybody's going to want to make a fortune on some books. It's not going to be pretty. Biden will go down as the worst president in the United States, maybe one of the most corrupt, but he will go down as the worst. And, because of all these things, he promised one thing and then he just did the opposite.
But Crystal raises an interesting point that I think worthwhile to consider, because we've touched on this already. Is I think one of the things we're trapped in is it's not necessarily, in my view, targeting the other side. I think what the problem is we're seeing on this is, again, you have two different conceptualizations of why there are certain disparities. I think on the right, there's still a big emphasis on this personal choice issue, right? That regardless of what's going on in somebody's life, like you pointed out earlier, there's plenty of poor people who don't get engaged in crime. There's plenty of members of minority groups who aren't engaged in crime, right? But I think there is a very strong proponent on the left that the fundamental problem is institutions, right? That the institutions caused the problem, not the people. And I think part of what you're seeing with this latest round of activists is an effort to say, okay, if we fix the institutions, that's how we get the problems to disappear, because the people are inherently good or whatever, right? I think that's a large part of what we're seeing with this.
Well, let me address, first of all, people are inherently good. There's a lot of philosophies, and the Bible even talks about that. And I don't think any of them say people are inherently good.
Mm-hmm.
What I believe is we're all sinners saved by grace. And, I say all the time, but for the grace of God, there goes I. So I think our ultimate nature is probably evil. And we have to learn to be something else. So I think that's the first thing. And then I would say, I wonder if this argument that you've just made might be a little outdated. It predates all the fraud that we found from the NGOs. And I would say that if we update our belief based upon what we've learned since then, how much of this activist sentiment is all manufactured by the NGOs? And it's not real to begin with. It's all a result of corruption. I remember when I freaked out 20 years ago because the federal government's budget was $3 trillion. Now it's $6 trillion, but trillions of it is going to these NGOs, and they're doing nothing but cycling money back to other people. And it's just, the stuff we've learned about the NGOs is not only eye-opening, it's scary. And it's like, well, how did Trump ever win an election? Because he wasn't just fighting the Democrats, he's fighting a system that was funding it. We're going to be watching movies for the rest of our lives about Trump's two presidencies. And it's going to be joyous. And so it'll be fun to watch.
Well, and
the story with the Southern Poverty Law Center.
Yes.
They're funding the hate that they're studying and feeding those reports back to the Democrats that are then saying, look, America's racist. My head almost exploded when that news story broke. I was like, ah!
But the terrible thing about that whole story is, I just would have thought 20 years ago that as a moral country, people would refuse to participate in a scheme like that. And now it's just, I mean, that would have been an outlandish story nobody would believe 20 years ago. And now, I mean, it's just like a fact. I mean, it's like all these things during COVID that were conspiracy theories that turned out to be true. I mean, that wasn't even considered a conspiracy theory when it came out. It's just, wow. We have a country that was doing that. I mean, and why would they be doing that? Just to impact or have an effect on public opinion to get it where they couldn't get it without lying.
Mm-hmm. And I got my favorite joke. So what's the difference between a right-wing conspiracy theory and the truth?
What?
About 6 months.
Oh, yes. And yes. And yeah, that's actually turned out to be true. It's kind of scary. I mean,
yeah. But I'm thinking about this back to our bail talk. I mean, somebody pointed this out years ago that we have a media depiction that comes out of Hollywood TV shows that when you watch police procedurals, right? The public defender's office is ramshackle. It's ran down, right? It's barely keeping its head above financial water. And in the DA offices, they have the fancy, machines and whatnot. But here over the last 10 or 15 years, a lot of people pointed out that in reality, that's actually opposite, right? The district attorney's offices are incredibly underfunded and incredibly overworked. And it's a lot of these activist defense funds or defense firms that are actually collecting huge amounts of money, and that's really where the money is. Do you think that's true based on what you've seen?
I do agree with the not public defenders, but the activist groups. I don't know if I agree on a public defender office. I think a public defender's office, the county's not going to spend more money on the public defender's office than on the county DA. But the problem is they may spend the same amount, so they may both be underfunded. But I think you're hitting the nail right on the head when you're talking about activists. Law firms, those are the groups that have been filing these lawsuits across the country that I talked about in the Dallas Morning News. They will never admit they lost a case because they're using those victories, even though they get reversed on appeal, they're using those to raise money. I mean, look at the most recent opinion from the Supreme Court of California saying that limiting the use of private bail for things. And there are some people arguing it's nothing more than a restatement of what the law is in California. But the activist groups, I've already seen a press release from that using that to raise money. And they're raising millions, tens of millions of dollars every year to fund these activist law firms. And, the scary thing from that is, we have a duty as attorneys when we lose an argument that's been decided. The next time we make it, we have to disclose the case law, but we can then say, well, it doesn't apply. Well, they're not doing that. I mean, they're not saying, well, I made this argument in three other courts, they all agree with me, and 3 other courts of appeals all reversed. They're leaving that part out. And so the problem we've had is the states have had to educate themselves and get to that level of knowing these issues. I mean, the same thing with me. I mean, that's what got me involved. I went to the first hearing on one of these cases, got scared. Came out very upset because I thought the judge was applying the law wrong. I thought she was going down the wrong road. And I'm like, if no one else is going to tell our story, we have to be able to tell the story. And I think we've been proven correct because I think she's ultimately been reversed 7, 8, or 9 times in that case.
Interesting.
Hated.
Well, Ken, this has been an interesting discussion because I think this is getting to a root of a lot of issues that we're going to be untangling over the next 5 years at least, right? Because I think the increasing disillusionment with crime in this country is something that is going to have some severe ramifications. But if somebody wants to get hold of you or find out more about your stuff, where can they do so?
Well, they can go to our website. We have a website called pbtx.com. It's the Professional Bondsmen of Texas. We have a blog where we highlight important criminal justice stories. We also have our own podcast. There's a link on our menu, or you can just go straight to thebailpost.com. All we do is talk about criminal justice issues, what works, what doesn't work. we highlight the stuff that a lot of times the pseudo studies ignores, because if you just Google these issues, the activists have learned how to flood the market with these pseudo studies that are just garbage. And, I would just end on the best example of that is they kept saying for years, crime's not going up. You don't have to believe us. You don't have to believe our numbers. Just look at the FBI statistics. And last October, I wrote an article about why all the different reasons why the FBI statistics were not up to date, why they were wrong. 10 days later, they updated the statistics and suddenly showed crime was up. I mean, It's just a coincidence of timing. And then suddenly the activists stopped talking about crime and just started yelling at the top of their lungs, Trump was a fascist, Trump was Hitler, because they couldn't talk about crime anymore. Those are the types of things that we talk about and we highlight, and we want to put the spotlight on these issues where the activists want to cover up the truth.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for taking time to join us today and go through this. It's a little bit more technical of an issue than we deal with, but I think it's very, very pertinent. So, and of course, if you're one of our viewers and want to talk to Crystal and I, go ahead and shoot us an email at info@775alive.com. But until then, thank you again, Ken. And I'm Scott Gavorski.
I'm Crystal Newton.
And we'll see you around the 775. Oh, thank you.